So I had to rush back here because I was getting into a really interesting conversation. That's what happens when you bring a really great and diverse group together. You get lots of different ideas, and this conversation will continue in that tradition. I tried to go through James's bio a little bit, but I left stuff out because not only is he entrepreneur and podcaster and investor and technologist and artist, but he was also part of the original team. He's a chess master, so he was part of the original team that programmed Deep Blue that eventually beat Garry Kasparov. So he's a domain expert in many different areas, and that might come up as part of our conversation. Matt is a lawyer by training and an entrepreneur with a demonstrated history of success, co-founding and scaling B2B technology startups, including Acto, an AI-powered learning platform in life sciences, and is currently the co-founder and COO of a visual effects company called MARZ, which stands for Monsters, Aliens, Robots, and Zombies. He's got a focus on company strategy, product operations, and growth. So, Matt, I appreciate you joining us. Next up is Erlan. He joined UTA, which is a leading talent agency, as part of their innovations team. Previously, he worked at Amazon Web Services, helping startups around the world build and innovate, leveraging AWS cloud technology. Prior to joining AWS, Erlan worked as an investment banking analyst at Evercore with the Mergers and Acquisition Group. And then Kartik, digital economy researcher, data scientist, entrepreneur, and angel investor. And if that's not enough, he's also the John C. Howe Professor of Technology and Digital Business at the Wharton School. He's also the CEO of Jumpcut, a venture-backed company leveraging AI and data insights to de-risk and increase the viability of film and TV shows. So what I want to do is put together a number of different perspectives on the industry, people who are trying to deal in their own way with the advent of AI, what it means to their business, and how they're thinking through the challenges that are associated with it. So let me start with Matt, since he's on the far right, you're far left. Matt, just talk about what you see as the challenges and how you're navigating.
Yeah, so I think we maybe have somewhat of a unique perspective because we started our company in 2018 as you pointed out, a VFX studio, but by 2019 we were already looking to innovate along these lines, and it was really driven by what we viewed as what the market was looking for. So Carmi studios like legendary, right? Everyone wanted VFX to be still beautiful, still high quality, but people wanted things faster and they wanted things to be less expensive. And so by 2019, we had already hired our first researcher and started to think about what VFX applications can we automate using artificial intelligence. And that predates, the Gen AI craze we're in today, which certainly, even for us who we've been in the space, certainly caught us by surprise, the advancements. So we are now kind of a weird in-between. We still do VFX and we still love VFX, but we've been doing AI product development now for quite a few years. And our first product was called Vanity AI, and it's a digital makeup tool that saved VFX artists about 90% of the time they used to spend doing shots. And we did that on a number of Hollywood productions. I think we're up to about 50 productions that we've used that tool on. And then our second tool, which we just got out of R&D on after 2 years, is LipDub AI, which is a lip syncing platform that operates at Hollywood standards, basically allows an end user to feed in new audio and generate perfect lip sync. So we may be unique in that sense, where we really did feel this was coming, and I think we we're surprised at how quickly it's kind of come and that it's here now. But yeah, we continue to be amazed by what we're seeing, and we just try and keep looking at trends and try and follow the trend lines.
Great. So moving over to James, in terms of like you do so many things, and one of the things I left out, I didn't even realize, is James has had a career in stand-up comedy as well, and you know, like just thinking about the ways that you use AI and the ways that you're planning on using it. Like, is it a partner? Is it something that you feel is going to be integral, or is it something that you feel, you know, like it's not really improving your life?
It's an interesting question. Oh, I have the microphone. It's an interesting question because a lot of the companies we're hearing from today are AI companies, and we're in that phase where it's really exciting to look at what the latest AI companies are doing. But it's also really interesting to see how everybody can use AI. And I do think that we should all be thinking, how can AI partner with me or collaborate with me or assist me to make my job easier, my life easier, my conversations with others easier? So for instance, I have a podcast, and let's say an author writes a book, wants to come on my podcast. I'll read the book. I'll maybe watch other interviews they've done. I'll do extra research, but always I ask ChatGPT. I just log into ChatGPT and say, what questions would you ask, I don't know, recent guest, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What questions would you ask Robert F. Kennedy Jr. if he was on your podcast? And it'll come up with really good questions that I might not have thought of. Maybe about half the questions I would have thought of, half I wouldn't have thought of. And even though I'm not just going to blindly go down a list of questions to ask RFK Jr., it'll give me starting points for dialogues that I could have where I'm then going to interrupt and ask follow-up questions, or maybe I'll switch the questions a little bit and tie them together. But it's really improved the way I do preparation. It's probably saved me hours of time for each guest that I have. That's like a specific use case.
Great. All right, Erlan, moving over to you. In terms of being in a talent agency, I'm assuming that there's a certain amount of concern, fear, from the talent side, from the clients. How are you advising them? How are you thinking through the issues from an agency perspective?
Yeah, great question. First of all, thank you guys for being here and being part of this amazing panel. But I think the emergence of AI really touched the talent agency on both fronts, the internal and the external. On the external side of things, we represent talent, creators, writers, producers. And so really figuring out what the fundamental implications of AI would mean to talent, whether it's helping protect them or monetize some of their businesses or create opportunities. And then on the internal side of things, it's everything from corporate productivity to how our agents operate to have starting points and ideation sessions. Another interesting component is that the emergence of multimodal AI now allows agents to do their jobs a little better with visuals and text and voice and et cetera. But tying back to how we as an agency approach technology at the first steps of iteration is education enablement. And internally and externally, again, with our agents and colleagues, executives, but also talent. And with talent, and there's a two-step forward. I mean, it's one, there's talent that's very hesitant and is afraid of AI, but there's talent that's also AI forward and tech forward. So you have different sets of conversation. But again, to summarize all up, is education enablement before anything else.
All right, Kartik. I'm not sure if I'm going to ask this question from a CEO perspective or from an academic perspective, but in terms of the approach that you're taking to innovate and generate a business that's going to fit into the AI world, what's the key attribute that you're looking for in a business that you think will be successful?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of hype around AI, but whatever business it is, it comes down to the same question, which is, are you solving a real pain point? And are you doing it with some moat, something unique that others cannot get? So it comes down to the same thing. For us, in fact, the reason I got started, I was not in Hollywood, not in this space. I've been doing work on AI-related business applications for 20 years now. and the applications have been in marketing and other areas. I've been interested in creative spaces for a long time. I've written a book. When I got my first sabbatical from Penn, I wrote a screenplay. It didn't get made, Carmi, but hung out with lots of directors and writers and so on. And I felt like I was seeing the creative space and feeling like there's so many things that technology could solve and AI could solve. You know, things like a lot of screenplays aren't even being read because there's just so many coming in and there's not enough time to read it. You talked about productivity for agents. So, and then you look at people not having weekends, you know, junior people having, you know, weekend reads that are massive, and coming on Monday either not having read it or having just, you know, skimmed through a few pages and trying to pretend they've actually read it. And so we felt like, you know, we can have AI solve a lot of these problems, and have a pre-read, be a co-pilot for humans, increase their productivity. And that's not just true for development, but you go into marketing, you go into other areas, you can build these co-pilots. It's about solving a real problem. And then I think the big challenge for us as we build these companies is, you know, everyone's scared about data. You know, you talked about rights and, you know, if I bring my data, my scripts and so on, you know, what is the AI learning? So you've got to protect that part of it. Education is a big challenge for us. You know, when we're going in, it's very hard to know who's scared of AI, who's AI forward, and their questions are very different. So education ends up being often one of the biggest things that we need to get across before you can actually get into the, you know, solving a real problem.
That's interesting. Just go a little deeper and just explain what Jumpcut is doing and what is the key issue that you're trying to solve for right now.
You know, the big vision, long-term, where we want to be 10 years from now is if we have more data on the supply side, meaning screenplays, webtoons, books, and so on, and more data on the demand side, meaning audience tastes, audience preferences, then we can leverage that to create amazing amount of efficiency in the industry, because the challenge ends up being matching supply with demand, and you know, you don't know what's going to stick, and a lot of money is wasted along the way, right? So that's the long-term vision. How we get there, we're trying to build these AI co-pilots for development. So whether it's a agent or a, you know, studio executive who's got so much to read, can we create a co-pilot that helps them read those things, figure out what to read, what matches their mandate, helps create institutional memory. If Netflix says they're looking for a great young adult comedy with a female lead, you're trying to think through what have I read in the last 12 months that fits. You might not remember everything you've read because you're reading so much, or you might not know what a colleague has read, and so can you create institutional memories around that? Can you just chat in there and say, what are the young adult comedies with a female lead that we've read in the last 12 months, and figure out what's in there? So those are the kinds of, you know, workflow for development, workflow for marketing. That's what we're trying to solve. And in the process of that, make the data available to the companies so that, you know, ultimately you can solve that supply-demand matching problem much better. So that's what we're trying to solve for. And the holy grail, of course, is trying to figure out, you know, a screenplay comes in, is this worth Carmi's time to read, right? And so can an AI solve that problem and say, you in a previous session, you kind of talked about, you know, dopamine hit. So can we predict, hey, Carmi might have a dopamine hit if he reads this, so you should be reading the screenplay. That's what we're trying to solve for. You know, the name of the game is finding the diamond in the rough. So can we help enable that, be a co-pilot for people who are trying to do that?
That's great. So this is a group, I guess any of you could answer or, you know, speak to this question, but in terms of being able to develop a system that returns value to the artists that were part of the learning model that AI was developed from, the underlying works, paintings, music, literary works, is there a way to run the timeline back to where each fragment or pixel or whatever you're talking about, where it came from, to be able to create an attribution model?
Yeah, it's not possible. I think you can do probabilistic and say it's highly likely, but you cannot prove it. And especially when these systems have so many large data sets from so many sources. So having worked with these models for a couple decades, I can tell you we've got a lot of explainability, interpretability solutions, which can say there's high probabilities and so on, but it's very hard to prove it. And that's the challenge that the industry has to face. And I think we're going to be stuck for a long time in this state where the regulation, I think tech companies will continue to do what they're doing, which is easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Regulators are still trying to understand this. Those laws aren't changing. Courts, Supreme Court is not going to let the lower courts handle case-by-case decisions, not make any decisions. Rights owners are going to struggle. Somebody said lawyers are going to be in a great place. I think that's probably true. So yeah, very hard technical
All right,
problem.
well, let's test the concept with a couple of other people. Yeah. Matt, what's your perspective on that?
I think what Kartik said is accurate in terms of being. I mean, maybe I'll focus the question on a different on a different element of the question. So the question is, I believe your question, Carmi, was how do these systems return value to the user, or can these systems return value to the user?
Well, to be clear, what I'm thinking is there a way, just like when you go to a grocery store, there's a list of ingredients on everything that you buy. Is there a way to have some sort of metadata that follows a piece of content that then traces it back and says, this is what constitutes this new work? It's fractions of a percent of this list of 100,000 things, but it is there are attributes there.
I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible, and it's also hard, right? Because I think when it's not as though the systems are replicating, right? They're more so inferring, and so it's not even necessarily clear that something new is. It's been influenced by, but it is not exactly. It's not a replica of the data, and so I would imagine that. And I'm not a data scientist, but I imagine that would just be very difficult to tie back.
It's just, Erlan, what's the perspective from an agency? Is this something that's going to have to be figured out in courts, or is there a business solution?
I think it's twofold, right? If I was to structure a framework, or how or the agency, or some of my colleagues go about this. One is thesis formation. To Faye's point earlier, it's not just technologists building technology and then people adopting it, or creatives coming up with technology and then hoping that everyone else would adopt it. I think it's creative technology and some sort of intersection of that, and having the builders and the creatives come to a thesis before we actually build out the framework. The second piece, again, not to get too technical or hypothetical on this, but the whole idea of an LLM versus a structured model. LLM, pretty much you have an open database and a large sets of data that feeds into it, and hoping that machine that gets built over time intuitively picks the projection of what the answer or a model or the input of the system should be. But then the concept I was discussing earlier with my friend Ben, the concept of structured models, symbolic models, that is based on the mathematical formulas, how these data sets are structured, and their clear framework of what needs to be spit out so the developers can control the output, I think is one of the ways to actually help protecting some of the assets of these creators, or some of the creator identities in general. And I think in terms of the art of the possible today, people were talking about cryptographic watermarking, being able to watermark content, whether it's visible, non-visible, having some sort of user interface for people to be able to interact with that. But again, a lot of it will come down to people like Kartik and Matt and James actually being able to build and innovate and take this information and technology forward.
A quick 10-second addendum to what I said. You talked about labels. There's a concept of a model card and a data card, where you reveal what's in the model, what's in the data, and so on. And so Llama, which is open source, they have a model card. They don't have a data card, but they have a model card where they explain the model and they reveal. So if regulation were to say, just like with food, you have to have a data card and you have to reveal it, then what you're saying is actually very feasible.
I mean, James, I mean, if you look at something that's coming from, you know, like a Dali, like a Van Gogh filter, that's been applied to an image that you use, you know, just as a human being, you can probably come up with a percentage of how much Van Gogh is in there versus Dali versus Picasso.
Yeah, I mean, the way all these models work, and like let's take just ChatGPT as a quick example, is that you ask, let's say you ask a question like, hey, can you give me a Bob Dylan lyric that's related to, or make up a new lyric in the style of Bob Dylan that's related to the morning sunshine in the fall. So now it takes that sentence and it figures out the thousands of possible contexts that sentence could relate to, like mornings, sunshine, music, Bob Dylan, and on and on. And how does it know those contexts? It's because it originally had data in those contexts that it learned from, you know, in all the, you know, terabytes of data that it learned from. It originally had sentences that helped it figure out all the different categories and contexts. So it does know the original, you know, it's 1/10,000th of this piece of data, 1/10,000th of this piece of data. But now with ChatGPT itself, because that data is not labeled, it's not possible. But my question here is for Kartik, perhaps, where what if you start an AI model from scratch and you're just using, let's say, social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, WordPress, you know, to get all the blogs ever written and so on. And so you know what the set that you're starting on, and you do provide some crypto solution where everybody's data is basically on blockchain. And if I'm going to use data that is from someone's blockchain, there's some payment. The AI platform becomes almost like a broker between people's data on the various social media platforms and the output, or the person who wants the output. So perhaps there's some solution like that if you're starting from scratch.
Yeah, I think if the model developer wants to cooperate, I think what you're saying is very true. Yeah, so when I was being skeptical, I was thinking of a world where the model developer doesn't want to cooperate and doesn't want to reveal. But I think what you're saying, if the model developer is saying, here's the data that's going in, and I'm going to work with you to figure out, you know, what portion of the output is coming from where, there's hope.
And there's incentive for the model developer, because let's say someone wants to, let's say this is a very important issue for society. We don't know if it will be or not yet, but let's say it is. Or let's say it's a business model. It could be the case that social media platform developers like a Twitter, Facebook, and so on could say, hey, if you're on our site and make content on our site, this could be money-making for you down the road. If you're popular and AI models are learning on you and people like the AI output that is in part generated from your, you know, not solely generated from one person, like it's not like a search engine, but if it's like, oh, these 1,000 people related to the context created that created a solution for someone, and you get a micro penny, but that engine is used by lots and lots of people, millions of people, it could be incentives on all sides for money making.
Yeah, and if you didn't do it from its point of origin, but you might have an AI capability that looks at an image and then redefines, like, this is what it's comprised of. Maybe that's even a possibility. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I'll go like through a question. You know, we talked about like how we're going to deal with things in the immediate. Thinking about the future, you know, like as we got into the internet, nobody really thought through, you know, all the things that we've seen that have, you know, come out of it both positively and negatively. Let's go down the line and just like real quick answers on what do you think are the secondary, tertiary level effects that are going to come out of AI? Like the one that I'll give as an example is energy intensivity. I'm very focused on the idea that energy intensivity, there's, you know, to do a AI search versus, you know, a Google search is many times greater, the energy it takes to train a model. So let's start down with Matt and think, what are those secondary, tertiary effects?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe I'll speak to it from, again, my perspective, which is graphics. But if I think about the immediate impacts, and let's call it the next 5 years, so I certainly believe that a smaller groups of visual effects artists will be able to do order of magnitude more output than they were once accustomed to doing. And I think the impacts of that, if we're going like to the second layer, are going to be that I think studios will have the choice in terms of whether they want to put more of that spectacle back on the screen, whether they want to basically pocket the savings and operate a more profitable business model. Alternatively, I think you're going to see a lot more of those VFX artists that have been empowered going and operating in different channels, like potentially on channels like YouTube, where there's a lot of potential, I think, for spaces like YouTube to be infused with visual effects that to date have only been really affordable for Hollywood. And so, like, as the price goes down, as smaller teams can do more, I certainly believe a lot of that work, if it's not picked up by Hollywood, might find its way into these channels where users have direct distribution and can do things that are not going to look like Legendary, certainly not, but are going to look a lot closer to that than I think we see today. And I think I always say you have to look no further than comedy to see, because I think the comedians on YouTube are as good as anyone. And so I think if you look to the one thing that Hollywood has right now, it's the spectacle. And so, you know, I think Hollywood will have more spectacle, and then I think you'll see more spectacle coming to spaces like YouTube and other social.
Great. Guy, do we have like 2 minutes or?
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
But
Okay.
we're a little over, so keep going.
Well, I just want to get, because this is important to me. I really want to know, like, what's that secondary effect? James, quick answers.
Healthcare is going to 100% change in the next 5 years. So in the past 20 years, we've developed a field of genomics, identifying which genes cause which diseases and traits, but it's a really hard problem. We don't really know how to do it well yet, but we're seeing that companies like AlphaFold AI and other companies are doing this 1,000 times faster already than other technologies were able to do it, figuring out which multiple sets of genes cause which, and mutations cause which diseases. That's going to get a lot faster, a lot better. It's going to cure diseases previously thought uncurable, and it's going to be, I think that'll be an amazing after effect of AI.
Erlan?
I like that you mentioned energy. In fact, I believe TSMC founders were saying that, you know, the evolution of AI models in the next 5 years will require GPUs that would consist of 1 trillion transistors. And I think today, NVIDIA's most advanced GPU model, the Blackwell, is 250 billion transistors. And that'll require a lot more electricity to heat up these models and then to cool down the chips and et cetera. You know, with that being said, I do think I have faith in this technology to be able to evolve to the extent where it will be less energy reliant, similar to blockchain, for example. Ethereum, for the first 5 to 7 years of its existence, was heavily energy intensive before it did the switch from proof of work to proof of stake, and that reduced the energy intensity quite significantly. So, you know, and with the structural AI models and the inclusion of a blockchain, hopefully it'll further resolve all the large language model constraints. Now on the kind of like the goal, the hope for the industry in the next 5 to 10 years, again, going back to the Hollywood and media entertainment, I really hope that a lot of these tools and the technology will be, you know, more energy efficient, democratized, easier to use, more accessible to creators, including blockchain and the rest of emerging technology, to then let them, you know, innovate, be more creative, and eventually improve their craftsmanship using this set of tools.
Great. All right, Kartik, bring us home.
All right. So in the next 1 year, I predict Guy is going to replace human moderators with AI moderators and even panelists, and panelists as well. So,
Come on, put 'em up.
but no, in the next 100, 200 years, I actually believe there's a evolution in the human race coming. So what I mean by that is industrialization moved human race from being a race primarily oriented towards physical, brawn-based work to information work. It changed a lot of things. we sit and work in offices, there's more participation among women in the workforce and so on. When AI can do a lot of basic mental work, there's going to be an evolution in human race as well in terms of how we work, how we proceed. I think, for example, it'll be very much oriented towards creativity, empathy, leadership, and a lot of the work we currently do is going to be done by AI. So I think there's a pretty big evolution coming, moving us closer towards human consciousness, moving us from left to right brain, all of those kinds of things.
Great. Okay, that is a great way to close. I appreciate your time. Guy, we're going to hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you
session.
for
Give
all
him a
the
big round of applause.
panelists.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Matt.
We'll
Goodbye.
see you in the next one.
Guys.
Awesome.